Greetings, mortals! Welcome back to my court. Welcome if you're new. I am your Hello Queen, and I am your host here for this episode where we're talking about episode 6 of Amazon's Wheel of Time, which is based on the Robert Jordan's 14-book series. We're now on episode 6. It's going to be a full breakdown. We're not going to be watching me diamond painting anymore. I'm just going to be going over some stills and showing you some interesting things about the world as we go. The same rules apply. So we will be talking about the episode as if you've seen it. So if you haven't seen it, go ahead and put this on your watch later. Go watch the episode and come on back when you're ready. If you have seen it, great, here we go. I am a book reader. I am going to do my absolute level best to avoid spoilers where I can. I may end up accidentally spoiling things. I do apologize, but there is a bit of a spoiler warning in effect when you go ahead and watch these. So if that sounds great to you, grab yourself a drink. Let's go. Okay, so episode 6 does a cold open here with the childhood of Siwan Sanche, who we will meet later as an adult. But this is a look into her childhood. She's the daughter of a fisherman in the country of Tyr, and it looks like it's just her and her dad through all of this. This is something we didn't see in the books at all. By the time we meet Siwan, even in the prequel novel New Spring, let alone the actual series, she's already initiated the tower. So this is a nice little thing they've added in here. They clearly love each other very much, but as we learn fairly early on, the people of Tyr have a thing against channeling. And someone took it into their heads since after finding out Siwan could channel to burn their house down and paint the dragon's fang, which we see here drawn in red. Drawing the dragon's fang on somebody's home is generally calling them a dark friend, somebody who's working with the Dark One. It's generally unpleasant. It's not very good. Tyr has a role to play in the prophecies of the dragon, and they don't like the fact that they have a role to play, so they pretty much eschew anything that has to do with the One Power. So Siwan gets put in a boat and sent up to join the tower to train her ability to channel. And it's very touching. We get very much the idea that her father loves her very much, doesn't want her to go, but knows that she can't stay here. And that's our cold open. Let's see here. Okay. So after we have our intro, we move to the Hall of the Tower. And I'm going to open this up in paint because I want to do some explaining. So I'm going to use this shot overhead. Kind of cuts a bit off of the blue aja here, but you can see the entire Hall of the Tower. The Hall of the Tower is basically the governing body. It is run by the Emerald seat we see here as she's heading towards her throne. And the peace is kept by her keeper of the chronicles as seen here. We'll talk about her in a minute. But each aja sends 3 representatives. There are 7 ajas. Here we see our Brown sisters. The Brown sisters are the scholarly types. They're the ones who do the research and try to get the histories and deal with the prophecies and stuff like that. That's their job. The White sisters are devoted to logic. That may change because that's a really nebulous thing in the books. They may decide to make their role a little more concrete. The Blue sisters, of which Moraine is one, again, it's kind of cut off there, but their job is to seek out just causes. As a result, because they tend to be more involved in the world compared to they do also function as spies to get information back and forth to the tower. And they can be rather secretive because their causes may require a fair bit of discretion to try and get them resolved. The yellow sisters we will meet a little bit later on. They are the healers. Most Aes Sedai can heal. The yellow Aja takes it to a new level. That they are always looking for new ways of healing people, new ways of treating disease. That's their thing. The gray sisters over here, they are your diplomats. So if you've got two countries that are warring frequently, or are at unrest or anything like that, frequently a gray sister or sisters will be sent to them to help them negotiate a peace. Then we've got the red sisters. We've talked about them. Their job is to hunt down and bring to justice men who can channel. And the green sisters here are the battle Aja. So they are the ones who would intervene, who would probably intervene whenever there's an actual armed conflict. Ostensibly, their goal is to be there for the last battle, but they will take part in any battles that need to be put down. They frequently go up to the borderlands to help out if the fighting up there gets fairly hot with the shadow spawn. But this is interesting. I think this is Karene's seat, which is why it's currently empty. My guess is what happened, or what we're supposed to assume happened, is the White Tower got word that there was somebody who's not only able to channel, but was calling himself the Dragon Reborn and was building an army. So the White Tower sent a group of reds, because we're talking a group of reds because we're talking about men who can channel, but led by the green because they're going to have to put down the fighting. And they had Karene, who is a senior green sister and a sitter in the hall, to lead that effort. And that's why that chair is empty, because normally that would be occupied by Karene. It's the only reason I can think of why they would very, very ostensibly leave that seat open. Then we have the three leaders from this group of their respective Ajas, from the group that did Logain. We have Alana, who, since Karene fell, is the senior green. We have Leandrin, who is the senior red, who apparently is second in command became first in command once Karene fell. And Moraine, even though she was she joined them after and wasn't sent there, she is the most senior blue there, seeing as she is the only blue. So that's what's going on here. The others are just sort of gathered in behind while the leaders speak for them. So we can tell right now that this is going to be them coming to terms with what happened with regards to Logain. Okay, so again, we were talking about the Keeper of the Chronicles. This is Leanne Sheriff. She's the current Keeper of the Chronicles. She was raised from the Blue Aja, like Siwan Sanche, who is the Emerald Seat, who we see here. We don't see a lot of what Leanne does. Her work is more clerical. She is second only to the Emerald Seat. She was raised from the Blue. Generally, her job here is to keep order. And she does the announcing of the Emerald when she comes in. Now, in the books, these ladies would not necessarily be wearing their Aja colors, although Aes Sedai do tend to prefer to wear Aja colors. It's not a given. The way they would be dressed in a formal setting was they'd be wearing a shawl. Every Aes Sedai has one. It has delicate binding on it and the Flame of Tarvalon, which is the upright white version of the dragon's fang, nestled under the back. But the fringe of the shawl would be in their color of their Aja. Leanne would be wearing a blue stole, since she's the Keeper of the Chronicles, which is sort of like a thin scarf. Blue to indicate that she was raised from the blue. And Siwan here would be wearing a striped stole with all of the colors, the Ajas. And we sort of have that in her, in the collar of this. You can see it in behind her in even closer shots. This collar goes up and goes around the back here. And it's muted, but you can still see the striping in this color. I think this is supposed to be like a ceremonial robe that she wears as the Amarylline seat, which they didn't really have so much ceremonial robe for the Amarylline seat, but we'll go with it. Then they brought in Logain. Logain tries to bluster. Siwan clearly has no interest in anything he has to say. He's blustering. He's trying to offend them by talking about killing Karane as if it was nothing, which obviously sends a bit of a rustle through there. But Siwan's having none of it. She's like, I know you want me to kill you. That's not going to happen. You're going to become a cautionary tale. We're going to trot you out to make sure that the world knows this is the price of calling yourself the Dragon Reborn. And he begs to be killed as he's dragged away. And then these three are asked to step forward because they're going to have to answer for the fact that Logain was gentled before being brought to the tower, which is not the way things are done. Too far. The Reds and the Greens don't generally get along. There's a lot of political underpinnings into how the different Ajas work against or for one another. But the fact that all three of these Aes Sedai, many years of reading the books, only so many years of hearing the actual things pronounced, spoke up in one voice and said, yes, Logain needed to be gentled in the field, that there was no other safe way to do it, is unusual. Normally, they probably would have just thrown Leandrin under the bus because she was the Red Sister. She made the decision to gentle him. She was the one in charge. She gets the punishment. That is still how it worked out, but a green and a blue speaking up on behalf of a red sort of goes against the normal politics of the tower. And the red, instead of having some humility and taking the olive branch that these other two sisters gives them, Leandrin instead throws Moraine under the bus. Well, why didn't she tell us about Nynaeve? And Moraine says that she was unaware that Nynaeve could channel, which means that this version is not doing the I know a woman can channel just by being in proximity to her that the books does. Moraine was very much aware that Nynaeve could channel in the books, but Nynaeve had already learned to handle channeling in the books on her own, so she wasn't a good candidate to come to the tower. They try to get candidates for the tower to be younger and therefore more pliable and able to accept rules. So Nynaeve wasn't a good candidate to come to the tower because she was too old and had already gotten past the point where channeling on her own was dangerous. Egwene had not. So that was one reason why she was trying to get Egwene to join the tower. That is a whole thing. Because Moraine is completely incapable of flat lying, the whole I did not know she could channel is correct, is factually correct. I think she really heavily suspected, but apparently did not realize that she could channel. Had not had any proof of it. And then Leandrin throws Moraine under the bus even more by saying, because the Blue Sisters object that Moraine's being questioned by the Amarylline seat, what Moraine's been doing on her quests is blue business, and it is. How she's conducting herself reflects on the Blues, so the Blues should be the one dressing her down if there's any dressing down to be done. Unless there's a really egregious error, in which case it would supersede that. But then Leandrin backs off and indicates that she doesn't trust the Blues to handle it, and thinks that if the Amarylline seat allows the Blues to handle it, then the Amarylline seat's showing them favor. Because it's the Aja she's been raised from, which is a big no-no. So she forces Siwan into just vituperating the crap out of poor Moraine. And this is where we end up. Moraine can't discuss what she's been doing. So she ends up having to throw herself on Siwan Sanche's mercy. Siwan breaks Aes Sedai's serenity and completely chops this woman down to the point where she has to abase herself like this. And that's the end of this scene. And we really get the opinion that these two hate each other, and that was shown in the last episode too, is that Siwan's is out for blood, that you're going to have to play nice to stay on her good side. But there's more to come. There is something else I want to touch on with regards to this moment where the Emerald calls Moraine out for being of noble birth. She lists her surname. She's Lady Moraine de Modred, and that is a name of significance. But I'm going to come back to that when we start talking about their relationship a little more as a whole later on. So keep that in mind. That's significant. We'll talk about why later. Okay. So then we have a very poor screenshot where you can kind of see Nynaeve and Loial in the background, where Moraine's very clearly not looking at them, but they're sneaking around. And then Lan comes in, and they go to try and heal Mat. Rand's at first surprised to see them. He had no reason to believe that they survived Shayal Ghul. He probably hoped that they did, but he had no reason to believe that they had. And then he goes, uh-oh, they're after Mat, so I need to defend Mat. So the farm boy pulls his sword against a warder and an Aes Sedai. It's a noble thought, but Rand, both of you them can handle you like you are a young child. Why are you bothering? And Rand does. He puts him down pretty quickly. Moraine goes over to check on Mat to find out what's going on, and Mat draws the Shayal Ghul dagger. Because it turns out Mat isn't a channeler. He's carrying around an evil dagger, which we've known. So Moraine tries to heal him with the dagger. This is a pretty awesome visual. The actors really hamming it up here. And while I don't think Rand can see these tendrils of power, he seems to be able to see this evil that's leaving Mat. So he immediately, when Moraine says you both need to hold him down, he says, yeah, okay, I got it. He comes over to help, and Moraine puts the evil back in the dagger. And this has clearly taken a lot out of Moraine. This was not just a, hey, I'm just going to do this and it's a fun thing. She has to go out and catch her breath, and this was a very scary thing. This took a lot of energy to do. And Rand comes out to thank her and kind of apologize. And there's a bit of a confrontation between Nynaeve and Moraine. Moraine's like, you stupid girl. You should have come and got me. And we know why she didn't. But Moraine's trying to make Nynaeve understand there's more in this world that Nynaeve doesn't understand. And part of being a wisdom means she has to understand that there's a lot that she doesn't know. I thought that was an interesting thing to put in there. Nynaeve's heart was in the right place, but yeah, no. So Moraine decides to take a little bit of relaxation in a steam bath, which I wasn't aware they had in Tar Valon, although it's a pretty worldly city. This is a little sauna steam bath action going on here. And she's using this also as a cover to have a covert meeting with, oh, wrong way, with Mygan. Mygan starts talking to them. Where are my notes? I have notes. I have notes. Megan starts talking to them about ships that are disappearing off the west coast. That's going to become interesting later. That Siwan's losing her grip on power and possibly sanity. The Aiel are coming out of the waste. We've already seen that in the mountain town. And the Trollocs invade the Two Rivers, and that an Aes Sedai sunk the Terran ferry. This is what the Blues are good at. They know what's going on in the world. And the interesting thing here is that Megan is also of the belief, not unfoundedly, that Moiraine and Siwan hate each other. Moiraine takes Megan's offer to interfere on Moraine's behalf, and then she receives this token from the Yellow Aja. The Blues and Moiraine in particular have agents in amongst the other Ajas. So she goes to the Yellow Aja quarters, and we find Egwene and Perrin, and luckily Perrin's back has been healed, because that was a bloody mess beforehand. They talk about them being taken by the White Cloaks. One thing's interesting is the first thing that Egwene asks is if Rand and Mat are there, and Moiraine doesn't tell her. There's probably a bunch of reasons. One is that Moiraine likes to keep people in the dark so that she has the power, but the other is she doesn't know who Egwene necessarily is going to talk to. By not giving Egwene the information, she's keeping it quiet. Egwene gives Moiraine the rings of her lost sisters, which she appreciates. And then the two of them talk about Perrin's eyes. And Moiraine doesn't really give her a lot of insight on this, other than we don't know what the Dragon Reborn's powers are going to be. We don't know how he's going to be born. We don't know anything about that. But whatever you do, don't talk about this. And when I call for you, come, but don't tell anyone where you're going. Keep your cards close to your chest. It's very clear that Moiraine doesn't really trust her sisters as far as this is going, or trust anyone. Moiraine has been doing this for a long time. She's fairly distrusted. And I called this one Pocket Dimension, because this needs some talking about. Okay, so Moraine's clearly getting ready for bed. This looks like a nightshirt she's wearing. She's getting all of her jewelry off. She's putting on some hand cream. And Leanne comes in talking about masking the bond. I've talked about how the Warder Bond shares emotion and other sensations back and forth. So if one of them gets hurt, the other feels it. If one of them is happy, the other feels it. If one of them's a little tipsy, the other feels it. But the Aes Sedai can actually mask the bond so that little or no information goes through it. It's something that she has to actively do, but she can do it. And that's so that she can keep some things private, as we're going to discover. It's also very clear in here that while Moraine's very, very close to the vest with information with everybody else, Leanne knows everything. Leanne knows that she's going to see Siwan. Leanne says, "Give Siwan my love," and continues on. So Leanne knows everything. They are very close. And then we get back to this. And I didn't know what this was last week, but this time we find out it is what's called a ter'angreal. That is a very fancy word for MacGuffin that does a specific thing. Although MacGuffin's probably the wrong word, but item made with magic that does a specific thing. Some of them require you to be able to channel at it in a particular way. Some of them can be used by anyone. But this one apparently appears to open a door to what I'm calling a pocket dimension. It may or may not have to do with the world of dreams, which is going to become a plotline most likely later, so just keep that in your back pocket. But what it does is it seems to open a door for her to go into a pocket dimension that Siwon has created or rearranged to look like a Terran fisherman's hut. Because this is very reminiscent of the hut we saw her in the very beginning. And we see a very relaxed, very lightly dressed Siwon Sanche, who's practicing her knots as she promised her father, and giving her a hard time for the performance in the hall, to which Moraine calls her mother, which Siwon hates, and the two of them fairly quickly reveal themselves to be lovers, which is kind of awesome. This was not so much explored in the books. There was a mention of the two of them having been pillow friends when they were novices, pillow friends being basically a euphemism for lesbian sex kind of thing. They were lovers when they were kids, and that's something that is kind of well known, that happens between some novices and accepted and that sort of thing, but is not considered becoming of an Aes Sedai. But clearly, this relationship has continued. We find out that Siwon is very much in on this, that she was there when that prophecy about the Dragon Reborn was delivered, which follows with the books. That is an event that happens in the prequel book, New Spring, when the two of them are accepted very close to being raised to Aes Sedai. Minion's going to come in here. I realized that I teased you with the idea that we were going to talk about Moraine's rank and why that's important. Why her name was going to be Incendiary, which is why Landon introduced her by her last name when they were at Emmons Field. Moraine de Modred. I mentioned in the primer, which I will link up in the eye, that there had been an Aiel War 20 years before the start of these books. That's the same time frame. While the Aiel War is going on is when Moraine and Siwon were accepted, and they hear this prophecy and they decide to do something about it. So they hear the prophecy that the dragon's been reborn. They understand that the chances are pretty good that the dragon could manifest the way that he did the last time, which is as a man who can channel. And if that's the case, he's going to be a target of any Red Sister who runs across him. So they decide they're going to try and find him before the Red Sisters can, and then try to guide him on his quest so that he can fight the Dark One. Basically mentor him, help him find the Dark One. And they have some leads. I'm not going to get too specific because things are probably going to change, and a lot of this is going to be very, how shall I say this, spoilerific if I get too deep into it. But they have some leads on where this baby might be, because at first, 20 years ago, they were looking for a baby. And initially it was going to be Moraine staying in the tower, and Siwon was going to be the one doing the traveling, because Moraine was a fairly privileged person. She'd done some traveling in her youth, and she had more of the political acumen, having been drilled into her as a Kyrian noble in order to manage the affairs in the tower. And Siwon was going to go, and she was going to do the traveling around, and Moraine was going to arrange things from the tower. That plan got scuttled fairly quickly because of Moraine's birth name. You see, the king that started this war was Laman de Modred. Yes, the same de Modred as Moraine. Moraine wasn't directly, well, she wasn't an heir to the throne, but she was probably in the line of succession. She just wasn't real close to it. But the Aes Sedai in the tower, now that Laman had been killed by the Aiel, saw an opportunity to put one of their own sisters, since Moraine was about to be raised Aes Sedai, on a throne. And that would give them unprecedented power if they have an Aes Sedai on the throne of Cairhien. And so there was this whole plot going on in the tower that was going to put Moraine on the throne, and she's like, nope, I can't do this thing that needs to be done or the world could fall apart if I'm stuck on a throne. This is not okay. So she hightails it out of the tower, and Siuan ends up being the one that gets left behind. But that's the significance of her name. She is of the same house as the king who lopped down the cutting of the Tree of Life that started the Aiel War. And she basically stayed gone until the Cairhien throne was safely in the hands of someone else. I don't know how much that's going to go into it, but that's the reason why the very politically minded High Lady Moraine ended up being this schlubby backpacker, and the fisherman's daughter ended up being the Emerald Seat. Maybe Moraine would have been the Emerald Seat if she'd stayed. She's definitely got the acumen for it, but I think Siuan probably would have edged her out on that. Who knows? But that was something that I had forgotten to say. I teased it and then forgot to actually put it in. But that is the whole idea with her name. And back to the original recording. They talk about a lot of stuff in here. This is an interesting little scene because they talk about there being a many-headed dragon and lots of different prophecies of the dragon, and how Moraine feels like she knows even less about how the dragon is going to manifest now than she did 20 years ago when they first heard the prophecy. And Siuan says she's been dreaming about the Eye of the World, and that's where the dragon, where the Dark One is imprisoned. Now, the Dark One's supposed to be imprisoned in Shale Ghul, so I think they're moving it for some reason, or maybe they're implying that it moves, or whatever have you. But they're also talking about how, if they don't know who the Dragon Reborn is, bringing the others may cause their death. In fact, they seem fairly convinced that it will. Anyone who gets between the Dark One and the Dragon Reborn is going to die. So, them not knowing who the Dragon Reborn is and bringing the others with could be spelling the end of the others. Of course, prophecies are cryptic, that no one knows for sure, but that is the accepted understanding. So, there's also the question of whether the dragon will fight the Dark One, or whether the dragon will join the Dark One. That's a fairly hefty thing that I think will play into the end of this episode. They're talking. That's all I have there. Two of them relaxing and they're talking. Okay. And then we have a bunch of stuff here. There's this little confrontation between Moraine and Liandrin. Liandrin overhears part of a conversation and she starts talking about how she knows that there are all these four others. Oh, excuse me. Big yawn. Okay. That there are four other Two Rivers folk in town, and Moraine is hiding them places, and Liandrin knows. And Moraine says something about she knows about a man from North Harbor and knows what will happen if she reveals that fact to the rest of the Red Aja. I don't know what that's about. It's implying that she may have a lover, I guess, but lovers aren't strictly forbidden That's not really a thing. So I don't know why this would be so explosive that it would shut Leandrin up and make her walk away, but it does seem to do the job. Moraine recruits Loyal. They get to meet here. We reunite Egwene and Nynaeve, which is very poignant. While they're in the hall of the tower. And then the two of them have an audience with the Emerald Seat. And we get to see the difference in personality. Egwene is willing to go along. Egwene is willing to bow her head to the Emerald Seat. Nynaeve is not. Nynaeve is a ball of rage. And Nynaeve's like, we're not doing this. I don't know what it is you're doing, but I don't trust you. I don't like you. But Siwan gives a speech here about how she understands that the wheel doesn't necessarily give you the life that you want. You may want to have an ordinary life. The wheel doesn't care. And we know from having seen her in the beginning that she's very acutely aware of this. She was happy as a kid with her dad fishing. But she had to give that up and take on a different life. And she's telling these girls that this is what they're going to have to do. The wheel does not care what you want. This is what the wheel has given you. And you're going to have to step up whether you can bear it or not. And we don't really get to see what their reaction is to this. Other than they seem to have followed her out there. And then we have Moraine's Exile. This didn't happen in the books because they didn't get to Tarvalin at this point in the books. Moraine and Siwan did meet up, actually a little bit later, and did have conversations about some things going on. One thing I noticed in this is that Siwan's ring here, the stone is gold. She'd been raised from the blue, so the stone should be blue, but now it's gold. And she seems to wear gold ceremonial robes. And it's not the yellow that the Yellow Sisters have. It's definitely a more muted. It's meant to be gold. I thought that was interesting. But I'm finding this whole ring thing interesting anyway. And then Siwan makes her make a pledge on the Oath Rod. This is interesting because that's a big plot point later. Much, much later. Normally the Oath Rod is only ever used when raising a sister to Aes Sedai. She speaks the 3 oaths while holding that Oath Rod, channeling into it to bind those oaths to her bones. Using the Oath Rod to pledge fealty is absolutely unheard of at this point in the books. So this is very new. And then Moraine is formally exiled, so that, yeah, here's the Oath Rod, the pledging. Now, the wording Moraine is using here is very tender. I think that's what she wants to say. I don't think that's diegetically what's in the scene. I don't think that's what everyone is hearing. I think she's diegetically, what she's actually saying is the same as what Siwan means for her. But in Moraine's mind, I think this is sort of a meta thing. She's saying all of these tender things. She's saying the Emerald's actual name. She's describing the Emerald in very tender terms. But I think outwardly she's actually speaking the words. Now that's my headcanon. Yours might be different. But that's how I'm reading this scene. And she is exiled. All of the Aes Sedai must turn away from her. And here we are at the Waygates. This is a very different Waygates from the books. In the books, the Waygates are stone doors. Usually built into a building, but not always. They're just stone doors. And you don't actually have to use the power to use them. You do have to know how to use them. There's a trick to them. But they are not required for the power. Clearly that's not the way this is. And that may just be the Tarvalin ones that are here. Because there's more than one waygate. There's waygates all over the place. So it's possible that the Aes Sedai changed this waygate so it could only be used by a channeler. Why, I don't know. Maybe they are all like this in the series, so that only channelers can use them. That could be a little difficult later. More yawning. Sorry. But all of them come in. They all get reunited. It's very heartwarming for a minute. And then they send the horses off. That's also new. The horses went with them through the waygate before. And Moraine tells them that they're going to the Eye of the World to confront the Dark One, so that one of them, which one of them is the Dragon Reborn, can complete what they started in their last life. Moraine channels the gate open, and they all go through it, except Mat. Mat does not go through it. And the gate closes despite everyone screaming to keep it open. Moraine doesn't make any move to protest and try and get Mat to come through it. And then it closes. So it's left kind of ambiguous whether Moraine let it close before Mat could come in, but it doesn't look like Mat's making any move to come in, so maybe it was his decision. So it's really left kind of ambiguous. Moraine plays everything so close to the vest she's hard to read. So I don't know if she was planning this or hoping this or how that goes. But Mat has been left behind, and that's going to be different because in the books he does go with. So what is he going to do? We'll have to wait till next week. We get to see what the ways look like in this version, because they look very different to how they were described in the books. And how the danger in there is going to be construed. So this shot of Mat being left behind is where I'm going to leave you. So thank you so much for joining me. Like this video if you've enjoyed it. Share it with your friends. Subscribe if you haven't already. And I'll see you in the next one. Keep it spooky, guys. Bye.